many people have already heard or think you know what an MVP, a minimum viable product is? Okay, great, fine, easy. Somebody else could do the so that's perfect. There are some slides in that case that I will just skip over. If anybody, again, I'll leave them up for a bit. If anybody wants to take a picture or take notes, but again, I'll gloss over them. I'm more of a talker than a presenter, so I'll try and leave it as much collaborative as we can, rather than just putting things on screen where people can just read from the screen. I'll leave time for Q&A at the end. By all means, if there's a burning, I always get told never to do this, but I do it every time. If there is a burning question that's in there, by all means, kind of let's deal with it as we go along, and I will leave plenty of time at the end. First and foremost, for those who don't know me, my name's Jordan. ChatGPT told me to come up with 3 words that describe me. At one point, these 3 words were in a different order, and then my wife kind of asked me to change them around in a different way. Yes, so, yes. FileMaker came first, and she wasn't too happy about that. But a bit about me. So we've got a little dog on the right hand side, Louis, little Labradoodle, looks cute, absolute terror. Father to a 18-month-old, which looks cute, again, is an absolute terror. From that perspective, I love my skiing, and recently I'm taking up horse riding. Talking about embedding yourself with a customer. Our largest customer is an equine insurance product. So I've been forced to do horse riding, so much so that I've spent the last 3 days riding on a ranch.
Really?
Up in Dallas.
And you're able to stand.
Sorry?
And you're able to stand.
Yeah, just. Yeah, I feel slightly ropey. I was taken out by a couple of cowboys last night down to the Fort Worth stockyard, so I have to be a bit queasy on the knees today. A bit about our work background. So I've been in FileMaker for just over a decade now. I've ran FileMaker Platinum Partners. I've started 2 FileMaker businesses. I'm currently, I part, own and run Neptune Digital, which is a FileMaker partner based out of the UK. We've delivered software for the NHS in the COVID pandemic response. So the team won an award for that. We rolled out an iPad system for about 3,000 users for the whole ambulance service in London. On the right-hand side, left-hand side? Right-hand side? Your right-hand side was one of our team's most recent trip out to a private Caribbean island with one of our customers who was fortunate to ship us out there again, learning all about customers from that side. And then I was fortunate enough to work under 3 prime ministers in the UK, heading up the innovation systems thinking, trying to get large organizations thinking about an MVP approach and how to deliver at scale. Which, if you think you've got problems in your team, more business, government's a whole different ballgame. So I usually do talks on UX and UI and design and how we can use design to do that process. And it always slightly frustrates me when people like myself stand up and do talks and say how amazing and fantastic can we build all these things, and nobody really ever shows their work. So I always like to start with a bit of show and tell. So you can see kind of the things that we do. This isn't a sales pitch. It's just kind of give a flavor of the sorts of things that we build as an organization, all built in FileMaker, all delivered in an MVP approach. Perspective. Okay, enough about me. Let's get into the detail. So the MVP, from a cultural perspective and how we deliver, we always start to think about what is it that we actually do as a community, as people. Are we developers? Are we problem solvers? How do we define ourselves? I'm starting here because this plays a pivotal role in the MVP approach. We've got to start from the foundations. So ultimately, I personally think that we provide value by solving problems with technology. Problem solving is the first bit. The technology we see as a byproduct, as the mechanism that we use to solve the problem. In some instances, it might not be a technical solution, a full technical solution. It might not necessarily be a FileMaker solution that we put in place, but ultimately, we're about solving problems. That's all well and good, but we come across challenges on a day-to-day basis, either internal or external. Predominantly, again, this is just personal experience, we find the majority of challenges come about managing expectations. That's either expectation of budget, timeline, delivery. There is an engagement where sales, I put myself in my own, the bracket of doing sales. The problem with sales is you promise the dream. You're telling all the possibilities that are available to everybody, and we can do this. And yes, it's all technically possible. You listen to the Claris keynote, and the world a wonderful place, and we can all have access to wonderful things. However, the reality is that we're presented with a set of challenges that either stop or get in the way of us delivering that wonderful dream that's either been sold by yourselves or sold by somebody else, and you're having to deal with the fallout of it. So the sorts of problems, I've got a slide that comes next. I'm going to pause there for a second. I'm going to open this slightly up to have some audience participation at this point. I'd be keen to understand what sorts of challenges or problems people come across on a daily basis or on your projects at times. So yeah, hands up if you've got I've got a list. I'm just going to play a bit of bingo from my side, just to test from your side. So again, what are the most common problems that you're coming across in terms of delivering software to your organizations?
Scope creep.
Scope creep. That's the number one on my list, I think, is scope creep. Anybody else?
Testing.
Yeah.
Testing.
Clients that don't have.
Clients that, yeah, bingo. Clients that don't test it, want you to test.
Budget.
Yeah.
Just clients. Full stop.
Changing requirements.
Change. Yeah. Exactly.
Client availability.
IT departments.
Clients that.
Just gonna add that in now quickly.
Client budget.
Would
It's
you?
a communication of the vision from the person or people who sold it to the people who are going to build it.
That's all. I mean, you got the majority of them from my side. Again, these are just quick things that I ask my team as to what they struggle with on a daily basis. Customers can't explain what they want. Customers don't know their own processes. Requirements constantly change. Run out of budget. They were like the top four that we come across. I have a slight, trying to stress to my team that the problem with these statements that they come up with is they're blaming the customer, first and foremost. It's always the customer's fault. It's never our fault as the individuals who are supposed to be the professionals at dealing with these situations. But again, I think everybody's experiencing the same things. So what challenges or approaches can we take to overcome these problems? Now, there is a whole handful of them. I'm only going to cover a subset, so we've got a baseline to compare the MVP against from that perspective. So one approach is, we mentioned it before, the waterfall approach, right? We spend 6 months planning, we write down every single requirement, and it usually starts with that repetitive conversation where somebody's writing down, as a user, I want to, as a such user, I want to, and then you just end up with a list of 6,000 requirements that now you're both managing a backlog and managing a delivery, managing a customer that doesn't know the process, wants a change in process, budget, etc. And again, to be clear and transparent, we tried all of these and failed miserably at every single one of them. But yeah, you could spend 6 months doing large-scale specifications, planning everything out in minute detail, only to get to the end to realize that what we were describing as that wonderfully written use case, the customer didn't really understand the ramification of that use case up front. So if we take that as a starting point, the words don't mean that much when they're written down in that context, then we could take the approach, well, then a picture speaks 1,000 words, right? So you could take requirements down, or you could do the approach of doing wireframing. Well, we've now got a customer and ourselves who are speaking about the same product, we're looking at the same screen, and then we don't need to write down the requirements, we can reference them on screen, we can collaborate around an idea that we both see the same picture, and isn't that amazing? We thought that worked really well, except somebody mentioned the customer availability. Customer's attention looks at the screen and goes, yeah, that's a nice screen. Great. There isn't enough, again, the customer isn't understanding the ramification of what the intent of the things are on screen from that side. Or in essence, I've been in so many meetings where we've done a really quick balsamic mock-up, like in an hour, put it together, like, oh, but we don't want it to be grey. And then you have to start that conversation of explaining the difference. So with that approach, I don't want it to be grey. Then we moved along and thought, oh, that's great, we won't do grey screens. We can do full fidelity wireframes. So we'll put the colour on. And again, surely at this point, the approach of delivery, we've cut out all this writing down of requirements. That's amazing. We've saved time. We've got rid of the option of complaining about the grey screen or the fake data. We're going to actually deliver proper screens that we're going to go through in minute detail from that and walk through every single screen almost as a working prototype. However, the customer still doesn't understand, and how could they, because they might never have built the software before, the ramification of how that system's going to be put together, and they can't feel the process. And still they complain that they don't like the colour of green that we've put on the left-hand side. Or can the menu go on the top? Or can that button change? Which are all valid requirements, but aren't going to solve the underlying issue that they've been promised something that we have to deliver upon. So all of that kind of supports a more waterfall approach in terms of doing upfront planning where everybody's agreeing a specification, whether that's a picture or words, that we've all agreed to, we're all going to deliver against, and then we're held to that delivery. The alternative to that is, again, what everybody's been talking about for years. Let's do an agile approach. Let's not do all of that beginning bit. Let's do a bit of planning, let's scope a backlog, and then let's start delivering. This is the actual infographic that we came up with to put in our pitch decks that kind of explain this wonderful process of how we're going to do all agile approach and sprinting and all of that great stuff that I've just spoken about. However, we still get stuck with the same problem, that this time it isn't the customer's fault, it's more of a technical fault. That what we've done is we've not delivered a waterfall project, we're delivering lots of smaller waterfall projects at this moment in time. So no, we're not doing a big planning phase, we're doing 16 small planning phases, and it would have been easier just to do the planning phase up front originally. And again, we're stuck in this problem, and I've reflected on this so many times with the team and with customers, that going back to the original point, ultimately our value was to solve a problem. And all this process has been doing is been delaying the time that it takes to solve the problem. So what approach do we take, and what does that look like? There is a famous sports psychologist, they actually came from the UK British cycling team, that was about how you start to deliver progress and change in a way that's impactful. It's a bit of an infographic to explain it. So, and the book, if anybody wants to read the book, it's amazing. It's all related to sports, but I think it directly applies. The concept is called the aggregation of marginal gain. And what this basically saying is the bottom line, over time we've got time passes. If we do nothing, time passes, in essence, we always decline. So let's put it in our context. The customer comes to us and says, I've got a problem, I'm using Excel today, here's what I'm using it for, I want to get off it, it's really inefficient. We've got two options. One, we can say, let's take the time to plan this properly. Let's do the requirements, the wireframes, let's sign it all off, let's deliver it. Ultimately, as time is passing and we're not delivering anything of value, that organization is actually on the decline because we're not adding any benefits during this process. The gap to us being able to do a solution gets wider. The reason why it gets wider is as they're waiting, they will be changing their process. So people don't just wait for change to happen. If you're stuck using an Excel document that's hard, that's tough, a paper document, somebody will go and find something else. And our challenge gets harder at that point because the customer is moving away from us. The aggregation of marginal gains from a sports perspective is stop looking at the big picture. Stop trying to run 100 meters as fast as you can. Focus on getting out the gate quickly. And once we've got out the gate quickly, we can focus on the next piece and the next piece and the next piece. And we're only after a 1% gain at each incremental step. How do you get 1%, 1%? It's a different way of thinking about an MVP, and I'm going to explain how that comes into it. But that whole approach, hopefully that's kind of set the scene in 15 minutes, is that this is the problem that I think we have today, or at least my team has today, which is we've got customers who have a problem. They're coming to us, we've been told we have all these tools and approaches and methodologies of how to get something delivered. Ultimately, we are delaying the thing that we think is valuable, problem solving with technology. Whilst they're waiting, we can be creating the best tool with the best code. If it's never used, it's worthless. Completely and utterly worthless. We've got developers who build things and say, oh, look at this wonderful code. is look at all the lines I've written. We say, who's using it? Oh, they're not live yet. Okay, well, they paid for nothing. 0. Nil. If it's not in production, it's not adding benefit, we don't know whether it's working or not. This approach in MVP is how do you do that doing the aggregation of marginal gain, moving 1% at a time in the right direction. Anybody got any questions so far?
What's the name of the book?
The aggregation of marginal gain.
It's $10 on Amazon.
It's one of the best books. It runs through how, at that time, not to kind of deviate too much, but British cycling was on the decline, and the coach at the time was trying to look at how do we get this as a winning team, and actually they've been the most successful cycling team in the Olympics for the last decade now. Still today, they work on the aggregation of marginal gain in all aspects. I can speak about it all day. Okay, so there's this approach. Let's understand, I waffled on now for 15 minutes, and the majority of it, I haven't actually mentioned the minimum viable product, or where that fits into the process. Okay, so we're going to run through understanding what the minimum viable product is. The really simple definition, which anybody can find on Google, is a minimum viable product is a product with a minimum set of basic features that is used to collect feedback for further iterations. Again, I'll run through how this culminates, how this delivers. There are 2 key things about this. I kind of ignore the product. You can switch products out for anything, right? System, app, solution, website, car. Product isn't the important thing. The 2 main important things is it has to be minimal and it has to be viable. If you're delivering a minimal product that's not viable, you can't test it. You can't test your theory, you can't put it into production, nobody can use it from that side. So the core key components of this is that it has to be minimal and it has to be viable. The product, people get hung up on the product, that I'm not creating a product. Typically in software, we see products as like a SaaS product, right, where you can go online and buy something. That's not what it means in this context. Now there's an alternative to MVP, and again I'm going to do some scene setting and then we'll go back through the details. Hands up if you've heard of the MLP. Okay. Yes. So okay. So there are 2 concepts. So there's the MVP and the MLP, and it's really important that we understand the difference between the 2 because the line gets very grey very quickly when we bring a customer into a conversation or a sales rep. Again, putting myself in that when we're promising the dream. Okay, so what are the MVP and MLP? Again, I'll leave that up there in case anybody wants to take a picture or take some notes. In essence, the major difference is the minimum lovable product is one step beyond. It's not just the basic features, it's the things that make people fall in love with it itself. Again, take the pinch of salt with the fall in love with it. If somebody's falling in love with the software, we've got problems. But again, MLP is going beyond the basic. It's the next step in the evolution of the MVP. When we deliver software programs, I always try to explain this approach to customers. The number one thing I get is, we've never built software before. What's the difference? Like how we're still stuck in the same position that I've come up with these wonderful concepts that I'm trying to get the customer engaged with to understand how we're going to deliver, what the approach is, why it's important. Because for this to work, the customer also has to understand. They also have to be able to self-regulate their requirements to you as well. So we start with this positioning. In order to do that, I use the analogy to understand the difference between an MLP and an MVP in terms of us having coffee. Okay. So let's take the example of we're in any city in the world. There's 1,000 coffee shops to choose from that perspective. You choose your coffee shop based off maybe the barista, type of coffee, smell when you walk in, the wait staff. There's a whole set of reasons that you as an individual will choose to go to one coffee shop and get one set of coffee over another. The customers are in the same position when the world's their oyster of telling us what they want in solution outside. In this analogy, a spoonful of instant coffee is hot, quenches your thirst, roughly, if there's any coffee connoisseurs, roughly taste the same as any other coffee, depending how deep your pockets are. But in essence, it fulfills the brief, right? I'm looking for a coffee in the city. I don't need to go to a specific coffee shop. I could go to the office, put instant coffee in a cup, and it fulfills my requirements. However, the MLP is a wonderfully refined cup of cappuccino where a barista spent years working out to make lovely patterns over the top, where the milk is the perfect temperature, where there's a $10,000 coffee machine that presses it at just the right time. That's great, we've now got options, okay? Which one do you choose in the analogy? Context is what's important. So there's options. Every customer has got every option that they can have when it comes to bespoke software, right? It's how much time do you have, how deep are your pockets? We're trying to get away from that. How to get away from that is we have to understand the concept, the context of the problem and what they're looking for. So in this analogy, we're going to use the fact that you're, more recently, if you're like me, got to get up, got to take a dog out for a walk, got to get back, got to get a baby ready, drop them off at childcare. If I need to get something or I'm running late for a meeting, if I need to get my hit of coffee in the morning, am I going to choose the instant coffee? Or am I going to go walking into town, wait for the barista to make it, then take it with me? This isn't a hard and fast rule for everything, but again, it's trying to understand that requirements are context specific. What the customer is asking you for, there is no golden rule that this is MVP, this is MLP. You might come to me and say, under no circumstance am I ever going to drink that dirty dishwater of instant coffee, right? Then your MVP is the coffee machine. Then we have to spec out, would you accept pods? Or do you want lovely ground coffee? So we're always trying to work out where the line that we're drawing is for you as an individual or for a customer. Again, these aren't hard and fast rules. We found that analogy works really well, either written down or shared with a customer, to get them to start thinking about themselves, to put themselves in the shoes of choose whatever coffee you want, choose whatever your requirement you want, but ultimately we have to solve the problem. So what is the problem we're solving? And then we can start benchmarking the solution from. Again, not hard and fast rules, but context does matter. So MVP is usually faster, cheaper, solves the problem. Ultimately, the most important thing, in bold, solves the problem. Down to that minimum viable piece. The MLP is slower, is more expensive, but the customer is more likely to feel happy that they've got some value for their money, right? From that perspective. And this is where the challenges of balancing the two and on customer. We're going to run into when you need MVP and how to approach it. But to give some, rather than talking in abstract, if I give some real examples. We've got a customer today, actually this week, who's come to us and said we're manually creating insurance policies using an Excel document. Okay, we've got two options. One, it's quite complicated Excel documents, or so I was told, as complicated as Excel gets. That we can go and spec out the Excel document, we can come up with a plan, and we can discuss the MVP and do this whole benchmarking of where it sits on the MVP, MLP, etc. Currently, they have no solution. They're working from Excel. As the time goes by, the productivity is actually decreasing, and we're not adding any value at all. So in that example, personally, I would say the MVP, this is horrible as this is, and I'm a UI guy and a UX guy, so take this with a pinch of salt, is why do we not just copy the Excel like for like on screen? We've moved them from creating separate Excel documents into a system that they can search, they can find. Is it nice? No. Has it transformed their world? No. But potentially in a couple of weeks, we're now adding value, right? And they're now on that train of constantly increasing the 1% marginal gain as we go through the process. Now, however, let's say you've got a legacy system that's 10, 15 years old, and a customer comes and says, I've got this system, it's really old and really clunky, and I really hate it. Okay? They've already got the MVP because they're using it and they hate it, right? So an existing system you can more or less take as gospel is the MVP. Otherwise, they wouldn't be using it. It wouldn't be working. They've already got the MVP and they're not happy with it. So if we're going to rebuild a solution at that point, we can't start with the MVP because we're going to ask them to spend a lot of money to come back to exactly the same position that they're starting today. We have the MVP already worked out. Roughly what they're after is the MLP. And then it's your decision as to how you go about delivering that. Is it a rebuild? Is it a reskin? Is it working out which things they love or don't love about the MVP itself? But typically that's how we take the approach. If it's an existing system and the customer's using it, by default, it has to be an MVP, right? Otherwise, they wouldn't be using it today. They're typically after an MLP. If it's a brand new system, we're more in the MVP, go from that side. And then there is a point where you'll deliver the MVP to the customer, and they will be talking about, oh, but I don't like the color, or I go back to the beginning again, right? Which is always great. Oh, but this just looks like the Excel document that I've been using. Why has I paid all this money, and why is it any different? The point is, great. You can now tell me what's the next thing that's going to make this better. Oh, it takes too long to enter information. Great, okay. 1%, right? The 1% marginal gain. We will just fix that 1%. Okay, now that's fixed. What do you not like about it? Oh, I don't like the next thing. Okay, we'll change the next thing. The 1% marginal gain. We've constantly delivered value through that process. Some people might be saying, that's how I've been working for years. And yes, I agree. In the days gone by, we were developing in live systems, so we weren't doing the whole SDLC and the release cycle. We were probably working in that very iterative way where you jump in, get a requirement, fix the issue, give it to the user, and off you go and you work that way. Maybe it's just us, but I've seen it time and time again, where all these approaches of agile and waterfall and requirements capture and acceptance criteria, it's great, but it doesn't deliver the solution to the problem. And the 1% gain backed by the MVP gets us in that position. As I said, I'm a bit of a talker. These slides are just accompanied what I said. So when do you need an MVP? There's a couple of kind of bullet points as to when to look out for an MVP. When time is limited, when budget is low, when the product's unique, and it's important to launch as fast as possible, or custom software. If it was already there, they'd probably be using it or could buy it. So again, that applies in most cases. And again, when the product is built for beta testing. Testing, somebody mentioned testing, it's an important point from the side. When, on the point of beta testing, in the MVP approach, there is really only one beta phase. It should be really quick. It should be at the start when you're delivering the first MVP from that perspective. After that, you're not the aim of the game is to get out of testing as fast as possible. To not be in beta testing, to not be waiting for the customer to test, to be delivering that 1% as quickly as you can from a minimum perspective. And again, transversely, when do you need an MLP? When the product is not the only one in the niche. My example stands in the sense of you already have a system. If you've already got a system and it's roughly working, then the MLP. Okay, how to build an MVP. And MVP. How to build an MVP. Oh, ChatGPT let me down. Okay, again, great context. Very high level, very abstract. Let's apply that to on a day-to-day working basis with the customer. How do we actually deliver that? Number one, explain to the customer that's what we're going to do. Be very clear, very transparent, or we try to be upfront. You have an Excel document, we're going to do nothing else than get you off that. We're actually not going to discuss or entertain anything more until you're off that Excel spreadsheet from that perspective. Customer quite rightly is, oh, but we quite like, and it'd be great if we could. Until you're off the spreadsheet, we can't do any of that example, or paper, or SAP, or Oracle, whatever it may be. Until you're off that, everything else is just a pipe dream. We can't deliver it until you stop using the thing that you're using today and we have you in production. So number one would be explain to the customer what we're doing, what the approach is. I would explain the analogy, walk it through with them, make sure they understand it. The best customers for delivering this are the ones who understand the analogy. But for the people who didn't, that analogy didn't quite make sense, there's another one that we fall back on, and some customers get it and don't get it. Is imagine that I'm stood on I bought a wonderful piece of land, spent loads of money, and I'm coming to you as an architect and a builder, and I go, I want a big, we're in Texas, I'm going to say like 3-bedroom house, that's big in the UK, but yeah, with half an acre of land. So I've got this wonderful plot of land, I want a 10-bedroom house, and we're going to go through and design it from that perspective. That's great, we can spend time doing that. I'm currently homeless. I'm sleeping on the drive, I'm getting wet, right? Every day that goes by, great you're building, great you've put these wonderful, look on these foundations, wonderful. Yes, I'm still stood here, wet on the drive. And what the approach that we get to take is, we know you want to get there, but currently you don't have anywhere to live. So, the MVP, what will you accept? Can we accept a tent? Will we accept a shed? Can we put a caravan on there? Do we start building the garage? And we move you into the garage first as we're moving along. And some customers get the coffee analogy, it makes complete sense to them. Others really work with the building analogy, which is as we're going, we're building that process. The next step is defining the critical path. None of this works without understanding what the minimum is. And we've adopted, it's a project management terminology, we don't use it in the sense of, if any project managers, we aren't talking about the critical path in terms of a delivery plan. We're talking about the critical business path or critical process in essence. When we're delivering MVP, this is all about understanding what the minimum viable piece is again. We need to understand what the process is that we have to cover in order to move you off the spreadsheet and into the system. So we're not focusing on a feature by feature at that point, we're looking across the board. You need to go from A to B, or in my case, I need to be watertight and some heating. A mattress on the floor to sleep on, in my building analogy, right? It's the success criteria. We define that as a critical path. If customers come up with anything that falls off that path, we don't backlog it. That's not our responsibility this time. We're focusing on MVP. If you've got an idea, keep it on your list, not on ours. We're focusing on delivering the minimum, keeping noise down. We're only delivering the things that we can. And that's really simple. That's by relying more on the old business analysis and analytics processes. We do process map things out from that perspective, and we're trying to draw a line as to what the minimum is in terms of delivering the whole process. And then using my house analogy, what we can't do, and this goes back to the agile approach, we can't just say, oh great, what we're going to do is we're going to start with my house analogy. You said the kitchen's the most important. We're going to start with the kitchen. Great, fantastic. We've blown all of the money on your wonderful marble worktops, and you've got a fantastic kitchen, but there's no roof on the house. So what approach do we take? So the minimum viable product, again, has to be viable. So if the house analogy, we'd say, well, look, by minimum, we need foundations, we need a wall, we need a roof. Once those are in, we can get you out of the garage into the house. Okay, great. What do you need to live in the house? Okay, we need bathrooms and a kitchen. Then the customers start, oh yes, well I'd like this tap, and I'd like this thing, I'd like these lights. And then we have to bring them back to, hold on. And so I'll bring you back to software in a second, for those who are struggling to keep with. In the house analogy, hold on, you can't cook, right? You're focusing on all the details of the things that's going to make this a lovable house to live in. And what we need to deliver is the minimum viable piece. You can't move in the house unless you can cook. You can't move in the house unless you can bathe. You can't move in the house unless there's a bedroom space. So we're not looking at feature by feature and defining the minimum in terms of the kitchen as a whole, but look at the context. And the critical path gives that context from that perspective. So yes, I have a house, a child, and a dog. Okay, well, what thing do we need? What's the minimum house that we could build to get you in that side? And once we're in then the process of saying how much budget's left. Going back to the person who mentioned people ring out budget. Hey, we're in, fantastic. Let's cut the rope, pop the champagne. We're builder. You've moved in. Congratulations. There's no carpet. Okay. So now we can focus on carpet. We can focus on the next thing. And in software, what we found is that really hones the users into what's important to them at that moment in time. Great. Yes, we're in. We're production. We get a big pat on the back. We've moved you off Excel. Aren't we great? Come and spend more money with us. Okay. And then it's the yes, but we'd like the next thing, the next thing, and the next thing. Again, the 1% What that looks like from that MVP approach, in more formal speak, is defining the user's problem, thinking of the minimum feature set, understanding the target audience, that's the context, a bit of research, user mapping, and developing and testing the MVP side. So again, I'm going to switch back to not using the house analogy. In my Excel document, we've now moved somebody in. It's a horrible looking screen, looks like Excel. It's a bit clunky, but they're in production. They're now going to be able to tell us what their problem is without going, oh, but it would be great if it did, oh, and it'd be great, and can it do this, and it doesn't do this, etc. You're more likely to get, this is now the problem. Usually one thing at a time that they focus on. We take this to the extreme in the case of we will only deal with one requirement at a time from a feature perspective. If you've got a backlog, that's great. In most cases, whether we've got one or two people working on it, we can only work on one thing. So once we fix that and that's delivered, then let's discuss the next thing that's important. And the next thing that's important, the next thing's important. We find if you then have a backlog, although backlogs are great, I've got nothing against backlog, it opens the idea to, oh, it would be nice. Oh, well, let's just put that down here in the backlog and down here, and down here. And can we discuss items 15, 20, 50, and 100 on the backlog? And actually what you want them to be able to focus on what's in front of them today, and what's causing the problem, in order to get the 1% gain in that perspective. Cool. We're nearly there. I'm sure people have questions. Some common myths about the MVP that I just want to quash at this moment in time. The MVP is not designed to be a low quality product. You don't get away with having saying, I'm really sorry there's loads of bugs, it's MVP from that perspective. Again, we're not saying it's a low quality product from that perspective. We still keep the standard high, coding is still done. There is still an element, slightly flippant with my Excel analogy, in the sense of still needs good UI, still needs to be thought about, security is still important. It's not cutting corners, to be clear, from that perspective. It doesn't necessarily help adoption. When this talks about gaining first users, the MVP doesn't deal with a rollout or user training. It helps in the fact that people are getting access quicker from that side. It isn't a full and fast process or theory or working solution as to how you roll a solution out to 50, 100, 200 users quickly. That isn't the aim of it. And from our perspective, it doesn't usually work because the change is so quick in terms of the release, and that 1%, don't rely on this to be user training, like as the holy grail as to, yes, we've delivered this, now we can just throw 500 users at it and we don't need training, that process. MVP is not a prototype. Prototyping is something completely different. You could prototype beforehand if you wanted to. The prototype is then a non-working solution that somebody can click around. If this wasn't FileMaker that we were building in, or Paris Suite, but typically if it wasn't FileMaker that's being built in, you might choose to do a prototype. As to get what we said, we went through low fidelity, high fidelity wireframes. The next one to try would be prototyping that side. But MVP isn't a prototype. It's not designed to be throwaway. Don't think about it. We'll do the first release, we'll do the first MVP. And if it doesn't work, we'll throw it away because it's not really designed to work in that context. No, think of it as this is in production. Users are going to use it. It's just the minimum from that perspective. There's a couple of different types of MVP. I'm aware I might have let me run through them. I'll run through them quickly just so you're aware of them in terms of different approaches. But I'm not going to delve too much in the detail on that side. Okay, there's a couple of popular ones. There's the Flintstones MVP. This, again, going back to the prototyping, there is an approach of MVP which is more in line with prototyping than actually doing a prototype itself. The important bit is that it's imitating features from that perspective. And again, it is a viable product in the sense that it could be used. You're just actually choosing to tell the user that they're not going to use it at that point, from that perspective. So the difference between a prototype is that they couldn't use it. It's technically not possible to use it from that side. Whereas the Flintstones approach says, hence the Flintstones analogy, is that, yeah, you could if you really wanted to, but we suggest not quite yet. There's then the concierge MVP. The concierge MVP is more in line with things in terms of automation. So again, using our analogy of the Excel document, the real challenge when we look, the biggest challenge we have is us as technically enabled individuals. I want to say developers, I don't know what the right term is. Developers, non-developers, we're technically able to kind of deliver solutions, is we will look at something like an Excel document and we'll go, oh yeah, just calculate that figure, right? Oh well, actually we could just automate this bit of it from that perspective. And what you have to try and do is suppress that urge to do that in the MVP approach, because what you're becoming is the scope creep. The technical team become the thing that are causing the scope creep outside. What the concierge MVP approach says is that there will be gaps in this process that might still have to be filled during a manual process from that perspective. Because all we're really doing in the first release is just imitating what's there from that side.
So how do you, I'm just thinking of a project right now that we're going through, and it seems like concierge is more of what we should be doing, but we're kind of, but the client is saying, no, all this is must have. But that means it's going to delay it a month or two.
Yeah.
So how do you wrestle with the client through that to go with that route, right?
Yeah.
And the example is the fact that essentially they're doing paper orders today. They could be doing that pretty easily. We're essentially almost done with it. They could be doing that FileMaker today.
Yeah.
But they want to integrate with QuickBooks to send all those orders as invoices and other things. And so do you try to, or I guess how would you handle?
Yeah, wrestle. Yeah, and it is a wrestle, right? Ultimately, I'll caveat this with ultimately the client, as long as the client's informed and they make the decision, it's their money, right? It's their decision, it's not our decision. What I see is our job as professionals is to say that this is the way that we as the professionals would deliver this for you. Since you're paying us, this is how we would do it. I also outlined what the alternative is and what we usually see. Make it really clear that, like my 18-month-old who thinks it's funny to start saying "I told you so" kind of thing, which is you want to outline that we think that this will happen. Like QuickBooks is complicated, but what you're doing with it, QuickBooks could be complicated. We don't know; it's an unknown. If we go down that route, we're going to spend a long time looking at integration, and we're not giving you the release of value that what it is, right? But it is a wrestle. Some customers just don't gel with that approach. I'd always bring it back to, okay, but what are you doing today, right? Yes, let's use the analogy. You've got paper, handwritten or computed? Paper. Okay, got paper form. My MVP would be a fillable PDF. Say that quietly from that side. It would be a fillable PDF. And that's where I would start, right? Which is, well, why is that not better? You can send it, you can email it, somebody's not retyping it in. It's Microsoft Forms, Google Forms, Iris Studio. Whatever it may be, right? That's where we start from an MVP from that side. And the argument is, well, yeah, but we want all this stuff. Okay, but I can get you that tomorrow. Literally. In fact, why don't we sit down now and why don't we do that together? And now you can start sending forms out. And then from there, quite rightly, they'll go, yeah, but okay, that's great. Yeah, we can use that. That's fantastic. And then it's okay, well, what's the next step from that? Oh, we can't see all of our jobs together. Well, that's difficult in a form, right? You're going to have to create a folder. Okay, well, now we might need to have a system. But your engineers, whoever's filling out the forms, are already used to the form. So why do we need to train them of how to do this wonderful UI? No, we just take the form and put it in a FileMaker system. And lo and behold, you can search, you can sort, you can find, you can send it as PDF. Great. Next step. Still MVP, still the aggregation of the marginal gain, 1%, 1%, 1%. Then it's a case of, well, office staff don't like using the form. Find it too clunky, they want to be able to see a list. Great. Fantastic. Next step on that side. And it's just constantly that 1% gain. And at any time, we always say at any time, the customer should just be able to say stop when we're happy, and you've left them with something of value. They could accept your PDF, and you go, that's great, thank you. Aren't I great? I solved your problem in an hour. Going back to the original point, like we're problem solvers using technology. It's the customer's decision at that point as to when they say stop. If you continue, if the 1% thing adding value, then we just continue. At any time, they should just be able to say stop. Then you've left them with something that's working that is of value. But it is a wrestle in some instances, to be frank. We've kind of gone through some of the other things about the piecemeal MVP, test and implement a day without developing unique software. That's going back to my point, right? Which is piecemeal MVPs, again, what I've just described. We might not actually need to develop software for it. We can just test ideas with things that they've already got. It's a bit easier with things like Clarus Connect. What used to be the MVP is no longer the MVP now. For example, use a real life example. Customer came to us and said, we received purchase orders from customers. We want to give the supplier a portal where they can log into, where they can upload their orders, etc., etc. MVP of that's quite heavy from that perspective, right? With Clarus Connect now, the MVP would be, that's fine. Get them to send those purchase orders to one inbox, and then we'll take the PDF out of the inbox and we just put it in a folder for you, so somebody's not having to look through. So again, it's a shifting landscape of MVP. So it's the piecemeal approach. But it's not always building software. The one that I love the most is the single feature MVP. And that is where we're focusing on one thing at a time. You can't start with a single feature, right? Because that kind of negates the whole point of it being a minimum viable product, that we've gone through the critical path, that we've defined, and it's the solution. The aim of the game is to get out of that approach in terms of defining the house and how many bedrooms and the size of it as fast as possible. Once they're moved in, again, just the next thing, nothing else. My analogy was the carpet. Okay, how much do you want to spend on the carpet? Let's not go for a cashmere carpet. Let's just get something down because you don't yet have fridge freezer, right? So you've got another priority over there. Once you get into single feature MVP and customers are thinking about just specific features, it's far easier to work with from that side. Okay, and we knew that, I said I'd leave enough time for questions. So the conclusion, I'm just going to come back to two things on this. Number one is the understanding of how we deliver value to customers. Is that's problem solving first and foremost. It doesn't have to be a build, doesn't have to be technical. And the second thing, if you go with anything, not to bang the drum, is the aggregation of marginal gain, right? However you think of it, however the 1,000 ways of delivering it, we only have to be an inch better than where you are today for us to be making progress. And it's how fast can we be at moving that forward. Again, going back to the point is we need to solve the problem first and foremost. What is marginally better where we are today? And we're not saying that's it. We're not saying we're walking away or we're leaving with you. Although you could, as a customer, say stop. We're moving along that process from that side. I hope there wasn't too much theory in there. There was some actual tangible things, although it's a quite conceptual and context-specific subject. I'll open it up for, we've got 10 minutes for questions, so fire away.
Yeah, got a couple questions. First one is, most of our clients, I'm sure like yours, they've never gone through a software development process before.
Yeah.
You've got to do some level of discovery on the front side rather than what's your pain point? Oh, we'll fix that one. You need to know enough of the map, enough of the geography to know where you're heading and guide them.
Yeah.
So how would you describe the level of discovery that you do just so that you know you're heading the right direction rather than letting the tail wag the dog from a tail that doesn't know what they're doing?
More than 2 hours, less than a day. Workshopping is what we do. So that's kind of because again, we're trying to find, because as a business, they could want to be like next Tesla, right? So it's how we kind of ring fence that. So yeah, we typically find that a discovery call is not enough. So an hour's call with them isn't enough to understand their vision of where they're heading in terms of like a wider context, scene setting, problem analysis. Anything more than a day, you're actually left with too many requirements that they actually really want you to relay back to them in a spec on that side. So
you're avoiding you're avoiding a spec?
Yeah, we don't. Other than the MVP.
Okay.
And the MVP is we are going to, for example, we will get you off the Excel document into a system and maybe automate this process, and that process. So you're still accountable, right, for delivering something of value.
Yep.
But we keep it a very high level on that side.
are you able to provide any kind of an estimate to the customers with a 2-hour to 1 day ballpark? Because I know that there's a lot of questions that I need to have answered in order for me to feel confident giving any number.
We mitigate that two ways. So once, yes, there is a ROM, right? If you're selling something, then somebody needs to know, well, okay, you're talking about this MVP, but how much are we going to spend?
Yeah.
And that's like a weighted question, right? Because it's, well, how much value do you see in what we're doing? We've got systems that have been built on for 30 years and they're still building on something. So like, other than me saying, just give us a blank check, right, then there needs to be some level. So we kind of say, look, in order to be where you want to be, you need to be budgeting somewhere in the region of X and Y. And we move on from that really quickly. Right? Because that isn't the actual thing that we want them to sit on, not because we're trying to like take money from them, or we're trying to say, look, this is where you, budgetary expectation, you need to be here. However, we're going to try and make the MVP so small that if it fails, okay, well, it's cheaper than paying us to do a planning phase to find out we don't understand the requirements in the first instance. So yeah, we do set, in terms of how we price this approach would be workshop. You need to expect to be paying somewhere between X and Y to roughly cover these very high level things, to have a system that somebody could look onto that does. But actually, we're only actually asking you to commit to the MVP, in which we think is going to be 2 days, 2 weeks, 6 weeks, whatever that may be from that side. It's easier with MVP versus MLP, because MLP, it's got all the fluff with it, right? They want to know that you're going to solve the problem that's going to be better than what they have. MLP's a bit more of a challenge.
So what do you put on the window dressing? So if someone says, we're dealing with this spreadsheet and your objective is we're going to get you off that spreadsheet.
Yeah.
Believe me, get started right now, maybe by the end of the day.
Yeah.
Where do you build themes? I mean, do you start with pre-built?
No. We don't build themes at that point because, again, it's not our money, right? It's where they place the value from that side. So unless there is value, unless the minimum viable is need, use the analogy. We've got one customer who has very specific accessibility requirements. So the MVP, it has to support screen readers, right? The contrast has to be a certain color. That's then the MVP. If that's not, then no, styling, UI, themes, it's us spending money on things that they haven't prioritized from that perspective. So what we tend to do is say, once you're in production, everything kind of calms down a little, and then we can start to make recommendations that are, well, look, you've got 5 users now. When you roll this out to 50, there's going to come a point where we have to look at the design from this. By that point, the user's like, yeah, that's fine, but we want this automated. Right, okay, well, we're just going to, that's fine, we've raised it, I've flagged it, we'll wait for it to come back around again in the next requirement session. It's not to say that you probably see from the system, right? We don't split out systems. Customers always come to the point where that's great, we now like it to feel nice, and the MLP bit will always come. What you're typically doing is providing an MLP feature on this kind of like acronym bingo. You're going to provide an MLP feature on top of an already existing MVP, which makes it easier to then do the lovable bit, right? Because you don't have to think about it working, or is it the right feature, or are we spending time? It's great, well, this one screen or these 3 screens need to change. The screens are working, they're using it, so then it is dying automation.
So the risk that you run in that is we've now built 20 different layouts.
Yeah, there's technical debt that comes with it.
That all of a sudden we need to go and restyle.
Yeah. Our point is yes, but you've had value from
But you
here.
still had value, right?
Yeah.
Which is a strong point.
Because we would have done it anyway, right? But our approach is we would have done it and we would have asked you to wait for it. And you would have had no value. And hopefully if there's an ROI, we've got money in the bank from your return on investment at that point that you can then re-spend on the other things that you want from that perspective.
One of the beautiful things that comes out of how you're doing this is you are training your clients to get in the habit of building their own list of I want to have, it needs to do this.
Yeah.
And you're building a long backlog of future work for your company. This is really,
Yeah, I mean,
If you can
being a
do
software
that,
developer.
my clients, I totally agree, and I got to work on that. I realize, because my clients, I swear to God, I'll go in there and I'm like, you don't tell me that's that you need that. And they're like, oh, I didn't think about that.
Yeah.
I swear to God.
Yeah, and that's the time, right? But then it's
Should sort?
yeah, and that's it.
That's me?
And that's the approach, right? That's what we're trying to solve, which is they haven't thought about it. Well, why would we think about it? And they, well, you're the professional. Yeah, but you didn't tell us. Oh, but, and then, you know, like,
Yeah.
so actually,
Yeah,
no, what we did is we delivered something. Okay, you wanted to sort, fine, okay, no problem. We didn't spend that much to get to this point anyway, so.
You ever lead them with questions like most of the other clients we work with want all these column headers to sort?
No,
Never lead them with that.
not until they're in production. What does sorting add? Right, so the value,
Not much.
great. Press the button, sort yourselves. Right? If that's a problem, fine, yeah, of course we can do it. Anything's possible on that side. But yeah, we try and be borderline.
Most clients, even though they can't define it, they know they want an upfront dollar ballpark. They don't want a 6-month process of MVPs, and they don't know what it's going to cost them.
Yeah, I mean, and there's a bit of cat and mouse, right? Which is they say, how long's a piece of string? How much budget have you got? And I could start at, well, let's start at $1 million, or we're not going to spend that. Okay, $100 grand, no, we're not going to spend that. Okay, well, you do have a budget in mind, right? Because you're not going to spend that. You're not going to spend that. You're not going to spend that. It's not going to be zero, right? So we know we're in a range. Sorry, yeah.
Yeah, so do you ever run into projects where the MVP is extremely large? So I'm particularly thinking of a recent project that we released for one of our long-term clients, and the system was integrating their bookkeeping system, which we built, with the ability to do ACH payments with Chase Bank, which was an extremely complicated, complex process.
Yeah.
Where the MVP easily 6 figures, like just out of the game, it's not cheap. There is no let's just do a little bit and this brings value, right? It doesn't bring value until they've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
And you know that our customer was fine with that, and that took several months to do. But is it acceptable for an MVP to be something very large like that?
Yeah, I mean, what's the MVP of the SpaceX rocket going to the moon, right? It's landing on the moon. Like, so all that happens is these things that I'm saying could be like, using the floor analogy, right? Could be really small. They can get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. The one thing that what's usually really helpful for a technical team is to have somebody who always objects to that being the MVP in the room. Like have the third person in. Groupthink's a horrible thing with MVP. And I'd argue as well, sorry, going off topic here, I would argue that you're not capable of doing it yourself. You always need to bounce off somebody. I can preach this, by the way. I did the opposite to this 2 weeks ago on a project. It was really simple. Customer just wanted to reskin. I looked at the system, went through it and was like, oh, that's a bit slow. Let me fix. Then all of a sudden I'm like, I've just gone into the same trap that we're trying to not to. So like, it sounds really simple. It's not. Like the better thing is to have somebody else who objects to your approach being the MVP and challenging, well, why is that? Why? Surely you can do this, or have you run through that? It's good to have that in there. It's really difficult if you're by yourself. Because groupthink's a problem. Groupthink within your own head is 10 times worse from that side. But yeah.
How does this affect your sprint planning and delivery, right? In terms of like, has that changed at all? In terms of like, we're always going to deliver, you know, or release every 4 months. I'm thinking of a more mature product, right?
Yeah. We're not there yet. Again, I'm all transparency. We're not there yet. Sprints are still a bit like small waterfalls, and they shouldn't be. The customer that we've just been with for the week, they've just got a wonderful release pack from us that's got all 27 features that we've done in this wonderful MVP release. They go, we don't have time to test 27 things. So now we know that that's far too long. Like the MVP of that, maybe we just do a release feature instead and do it at the end of every single day. And actually we'll set on a call with them and get them to test or not test or demo it on the call from that side. So we're not, the answer is not quite there in terms of changing the sprint model. We're still doing 2-week sprints, but it doesn't quite work in that approach. So yeah. Go for it.
Sure. Do you ever run into a situation where you already have a minimum viable product, but the database schema is so outdated or the system becomes so slow, you consider looking at maybe making a smaller MVP kind of outside of that product, right? Ever the technical debt is so high, the cost for iterating an MLP from that MVP is not practical.
yeah, I mean, we've got one specific customer who's had a system for 30 years who, I mean, we do as much as possible not to go into that system. Right?
Yeah.
But again, the question is where do they, it's not just our definition of MVP, it's where they place the value on this line, right? So our job is to say, us adding to this code base isn't moving fast in that direction. But as long as they're happy to accept that it's moving, then yes. And then there's another, again, it sounds like we're just full of analogies, but we're not. But in essence, we try and think of it as a riverbed, right? There's the current underneath that's like the technical current that we're responsible for moving along. The customer doesn't really care because they can't see it, right? Versus there's what they can see, which is the top of the water. We've got to balance the delivery between, in that analogy, an old system. Yes, great. They care about just seeing what's on the top, what they can actually see. We've got to, at the same time, try to mitigate some risk of underneath piece. We tend to, there's more focus on that on older legacy systems because you're going in and you might not be able to do the MVP because it won't be accepted as viable because it's too slow or too clunky based off the code base. Right. But certainly we've separated whole sections out to be able to deliver quickly. Customer portals are a great one for that. Just like separate the whole thing separately and we'll just deliver the portal without having to build on top of what's already outside. Gotcha. Yeah.
I think there's a thin line between MVP versus low-hanging fruit. And try to get behind the idea of marginal gain. Like I agree with it, but I feel like there's always a risk of someone mixing MVP with low-hanging fruit so that they can get behind the excuse of, yes, we're delivering values, but you can easily that your aggregated marginal gain could be outweighed by your opportunity lost of not doing something that's truly important. And also all the added up change management costs. Yeah. So how do you avoid that? How do you mitigate that risk?
So there comes a point where this model slightly changes in the sense of, right, you'll get to a point where you just adding the MVP size changes as you go through it. So MVP at the start using something small is really quick, really easy to define from that side. Gets to the point where actually you've now got a system. We might still be going into the same issues at that point where we've got a system and the process was wrong. Like fundamentally, the process that underpinned what we're trying to deliver was completely wrong. And then we might have to have that conversation which we're defining what the process is and certain things might need to change. Our position is it's better to do that when they have a working system that they've had the value from than to try and deliver a system. They say, we cannot, what you delivered is useless because we won't take it into production because it doesn't match. We've now realized the process doesn't align correctly from that side. What we're doing is we roughly get to the same position at the same time, if that's going to rear its head, except we get to claim that you've been live for 6 months, right? So you've had value from us that we've been able to build for that you can't say we haven't done our job. Whereas the alternative is you go through the planning, we build a system, doesn't go live because of something, and then we've delivered nothing, right? And then the customer gets annoyed because they said we spent loads of money. You say, yes, but we spent the work and the developer's done it. And they'll be, we can't use it in production. We've spent the time, the developer's spent. Yeah. And it's just negating that. All we're trying to do is negate that awkward conversation, which is they say you've delivered nothing, and we say, yes, but we've spent the time. You need to pay for it. But it's a problem. It doesn't negate that. It's just, we coalesce at the same point at the same time.
We actually just dealt the case where we felt we delivered the MVP product. They said, well, no, we want the MLP product.
Yeah.
Like, okay, that's later. You have to pay your bill for the MVP product.
Yeah, take it into production, use it.
Yeah.
How do you know it's what you want until you're actually using it?
Well, and they are using it.
Yeah.
Right? It's just not, they don't love it yet.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm like, okay, I know you don't love it yet, but you have one guy who wants bigger buttons,
Yeah.
for stuff.
Yeah. Thank you. No problem. I'll be a pal.